WHGE 95.3 FM. Coming up, the Open Eye.
Those of us that indulge in or commit intellectual violence don't do so for the pleasure of mental masturbation or ego diddling. We do so because the chains of oppression on our people's minds are deep and difficult to remove.
Good morning, my children of the sun. Welcome to the Open Eye on WHGE 95.3 FM. Yes, D, let's get them started. Every generation has its purpose. Ours is to reveal the truth and reverse the brainwashing. And we do that right here. That's right. Listening to the Open Eye. What is that? You're listening to the Open Eye, where we don't just look, we see. And today we're going to deal with something rare in this country. Not opinions, not narratives, not spin, but patterns. Because once you learn to see patterns, and you stop being surprised by outcomes. You stop asking, how did this happen? And start asking, why does this keep happening? See, America has a way of reacting to events. Like every moment is isolated. Like every injustice is brand new. Like every outrage just fell out of the sky this morning, but that's a goddamn lie. There's nothing new about systems protecting themselves. There's nothing new about power rewriting the story while the truth is still bleeding on the ground. There's nothing new about excellence being labeled as a threat or survival being twisted into crime. We've seen it in housing. We've seen it in policing. We've seen it in education. We've seen it in media narratives that can turn a winner into a villain depending on who crossed the finish line first. And the most dangerous part isn't just the injustice. It's the conditioning. The conditioning that tells you what you're seeing isn't what you're seeing. The conditioning that trains people to sympathize with power and scrutinize the powerless. The conditioning that can watch somebody earn something rightfully, clearly, undeniably, and still ask, yeah, but did they deserve it? That's not confusion, that's design. Because once the society can be trained to question truth in real time, you don't need change anymore. You don't need laws as loud as Jim Crow. You don't need language. You don't need framing. You just need repetition. And before long, people will defend a system that has never once defended them. So today we're not just talking about headlines. We're talking about the blueprint behind them. We're pulling the curtain back on the patterns that connect the dots they hope you never connect. Because once you see it, really see it, you can't unsee it. You stop playing along. That's sort of, this is the Open Eye. Let's get to work. Let me get my disclaimer out of the way here.
The views and opinions expressed on Open Eye are those of the hosts, guests, and contributors, and do not reflect the policy or position of WHGE 95.3 FM, nor our sponsor, the Delaware Center for Homeless Vets. Any content provided by Open Eye's hosts, guests, or contributors are theirs and are not intended to malign any religion, ethnic group, company, or individual.
WHGE 95.3 FM. This is the open eye. All right. You know, for decades, history books taught us that the Atlantic was a one-way street. A vast, impassable blue wall that only Europeans had the tools to crack. But if you look at the archaeological record and the sheer engineering genius of West African shipbuilders, that story starts to leak water fast. See, the master builders on the Gold Coast and Senegambia weren't just making boats. They were engineering marvels. We're talking about a massive vessel, some over 80 feet long, carved from giant Iroko trees. They used fire and steam to stretch the wood, adding internal ribs and raised planks until they had ships capable of carrying over 100 people. And here's the kicker. While European ships often struggle with the brutal Atlantic surf, African surf boats were designed specifically to punch through those waves. They were the Ferraris of the coastline, fast, stable, and incredibly resilient. Then there's the mastery of the Mansa Abu Bakr II in the 14th century, long before Columbus had a map. This emperor of Mali reportedly abdicated his throne to lead an expedition of 2,000 ships into the encircling ocean. Skeptics say they couldn't have made it. But oceanographers point out that the Canary and the Guinea currents act like natural conveyor belts, pulling anything off the coast of West Africa directly toward the Americas. These mariners didn't just have the ships, they had the highway. From the Soon plank of the Swahili coast to the massive war canoes of the Niger Delta, Africa's maritime tradition wasn't a footnote, it was a powerhouse. They had the metallurgy for tools, the textiles for sails, and the celestial knowledge to navigate by stars. The ocean wasn't a barrier to these civilizations, it was a bridge. It's time we stop asking if they had the skill and start asking why we were ever told they didn't. This is the open eye. And this is the Hidden History Moment. WHGE 95.3 FM. WHGE 95.3 FM, the open eye. Little PSA here. Woodlawn trustees and the Todd Modern Foundation are pleased to announce the opening of Spruce Street Park. This park is for the benefit of the surrounding community. Amenities include a grill, chess table, sharing library, and seating. As you know, the park has locked gates. To obtain the access code, please send an email with your name and address to Spruce Park at toddmodernfoundation.org. That's Spruce Park at toddmodernfoundation.org. All right? All right. Moving right along. Okay. Listen here. They didn't discover it. Now, I just told you about African sailors. How do you think Columbus got to America? The Moors showed him how to get there. Was his name Pedro Alonso or something like that? He was his navigator. How do you think he knew? He learned from Mali He learned from being on the west coast of Africa. They didn't discover it, they renamed it. And they have a pattern. Call me crazy, but watch the pattern. When they don't want something, they ridicule it. When they can't suppress it, they sanitize it. And when they want to own it, they rename it. So now we're supposed to believe that Tracy Ellis Ross, wearing a natural afro, is rocking a cloud bob. A cloud bob, not an afro, not a crown, not a political statement rooted in resistance, a cloud. That's not harmless. That's strategy. Because the word afro is loud. It's specific. It's historical. It's black. You can't say afro without invoking struggle, identity, and defiance. But cloud bob? Yeah. Now, it's neutral. It's soft. It's available. Let's not play dumb about how this works. For generations, black hair wasn't just criticized, it was criminalized. From slavery to segregation, laws and social codes policed black bodies down to the follicle. Cover it, straighten it, hide it, control it. Then came the 1960s. And suddenly, that same hair told us to hide. They told us to hide. It became a weapon. The afro didn't just emerge, it declared war on assimilation. Organizations like the Black Panther Party didn't wear afros for aesthetics. They wore them as ideology. Black is beautiful wasn't a slogan, it was a correction to centuries of psychological warfare. The afro said, we are not fixing ourselves to fit your standard. We are the standard. Now fast forward. The same system that produced hair anxiety in black communities, jobs denied, kids sent home from school, policies disguised as professionalism, is now quietly circling back around that same hair with a new question. How do we make it ours without acknowledging where it came from? Answer, rename it. Because it isn't new. Cornrows became boxer braids. Bantu knots became mini buns. Edges became baby hairs until they become trendy styling techniques. It is what people call cultural erasure through rebranding. Some call it Columbusing. Discovering what was already existed and then claiming it with a new name and no history attached. And here's the deeper play. When you rename something, you don't just change the word, you change the ownership. You detach it from the oppression that tried to erase it, the people who preserved it, the meaning that gave it power. Now it's just a trend, temporary, disposable, monetizable. And that's dangerous. Because if the afro becomes just another cloud bob, then the next generation doesn't see resistance, they see fashion. They don't see rebellion, they see aesthetic. They don't see history, they see hashtags. And let's go even further, because you started touching on something people get uncomfortable with. There's a long documented history of black features being mocked and then mimicked. Bodies, lips, skin tone, rhythm, style. Ridiculed first, profited from later. So no, it's not far-fetched to think the same system that once rejected natural black hair is now figuring out how to consume it without crediting where it came from. It's not conspiracy. That's pattern recognition. And here's the line that needs to be drawn. An afro is not a look. It's not a phrase. It's not a phase. It's not a cloud. It's a symbol born out of resistance, sharpened in the 1960s and carried forward by people who had to fight to wear their hair the way it grows out of their head. You don't get to erase that with branding. You don't get to soften it with language. And you don't get to profit off of that while pretending it just appeared. So call it what it is. Respect the roots. Respect the history. Respect the people who paid the cost for it to exist in public unapologetically. Because some things are too powerful to be rebranded. And the Afro is one of them. This is the Open Eye of Patrice Gibbs. Hey, Sherry, I see you. Yeah, I know. We'll talk about it. WHGE 95.3 FM. All right. I want to say let me slow it down a little bit, but gotta keep moving here. The finish line fallacy. Let's talk about Joshua Jackson's victory. Who's Joshua Jackson? You'll know in a minute. Listen up, because the fallout from the Delaware Marathon is a masterclass in how America handles a meritocracy when the wrong person wins. It is a perfect, ugly little microcosm of the national psyche. Here's the scene. You had a front runner, a white man, who felt so secure in his lead that he started the victory lap before he even hit the tape. He was dancing. He was checking his watch. He was basking in the roar of the crowd, convinced every single scream was a tribute to his inevitable triumph. He wasn't running a race anymore. He was performing a coronation. Yeah, the reality. But right behind him, Joshua Jackson. Jackson wasn't dancing. He wasn't checking his watch. He was grinding. He was moving faster, working harder, and running like his life depended on the next 10 meters. He didn't just close the gap, he evaporated it. In those final seconds, Jackson did what athletes are trained to do. He competed until the whistle blew. He crossed that line 2 seconds ahead. By every definition of sport, that is a clean, hard-earned, undisputed victory. Yeah, indeed. Yes, that. Yeah, he did, Sherry. That idiot assumed he won the race. And he only made an ass out of himself. Now let's look at the headlines. Listen to the water cooler talk. They didn't call it a spectacular comeback or a display of elite endurance. Instead, the language turned dark. They said Joshua Jackson robbed him. They said he snatched the banner out of that man's hand. They framed it as if Jackson had committed a theft rather than won a sprint. And here's the hard truth. They demonized Joshua Jackson for the sin of being better. They took a moment of supreme athletic excellence and reframed it as an act of aggression. Why? Because the world felt uncomfortable with the man dancing. And they felt robbed of the ending they had already written in their heads. Instead of highlighting Jackson's speed, they centered the other man's hurt. They prioritized the feelings of the loser over the facts of the winner. Congratulations, Joshua Jackson. You didn't just win a race, you exposed the narrative. You are the champion. You are number one, and no amount of linguistic gymnastics can take those 2 seconds back. Keep running. The truth is right there at the finish line. Go ahead, Joshua Jackson. Show him how it's done. It's the Open Eye. WHGE 95.3 FM, the Open Eye. Some of you may have heard me say this before. The beginning of the end for any society is the moment it accepts immorality as normal. Once corruption becomes culture, once decadence becomes fashionable, once vice is celebrated and principle is mocked, collapse is no longer a possibility. It's a countdown. Empires are rarely destroyed from the outside before they first rotted from within. And history has given us warnings. The Greeks, the Romans, the Ottoman Turks. Look them up because they all have something in common. And it's in common with right here. Civilizations not only do not fall only because enemies attack them. They fall because they lose the moral strength to defend what made them worth saving in the first place. A society does not collapse the day the enemy arrives. It collapses the day it stops recognizing the enemy within. Let me say that again. The beginning of the end is not invasion. The beginning of the end is normalization. When the people begin to normalize what they once condemned, when wrong no longer feels wrong, when corruption no longer shocks, when truth becomes optional, that is not evolution, that's decay. Because moral collapse doesn't announce itself with silence. It creeps in quietly. It negotiates, it rebrands, it justifies. It tells you that standards are outdated. It tells you discipline is oppression. And it tells you integrity is naive. It tells you that anything goes as long as it feels good, looks good, or profits somebody. And before long, you're not a society with values anymore. You're a society with excuses. History is already testifying. The ancient Greek, once the cradle of philosophy, logic, and structured thought, did not fall simply because outsiders were stronger. It fractured from within. Political instability, internal rivalry, a loss of unity that made it vulnerable to take over. The Roman Empire, the most powerful empire the world had ever seen, didn't just collapse because of barbarian invasions. Rome rotted from the inside first. Political corruption, moral decay, leadership driven by power, not principle, bred in circuses to distract the population while the foundation cracked beneath their feet. And the Ottoman Empire, which stood for centuries, didn't disappear overnight. It declined slowly. Administrative corruption, loss of discipline, a system that stopped reforming itself while the world around it evolved. Different empires, different cultures, same pattern. Because the formula doesn't change. No society can survive when corruption is rewarded. Truth is negotiable. Leadership is self-serving. And the people are too distracted or too comfortable to give a damn. That's how collapse works. That's not an explosion, that's erosion. Not a single moment, but 1,000 small surrenders. 1,000 times people see something wrong and say nothing. 1,000 times people benefit from what's broken and refuse to fix it. 1,000 times people trade principles for convenience. And then one day, everybody looks around and asks, what happened? What happened is that the line between right and wrong disappeared. And once society loses that line, once it can no longer tell the difference between strength and weakness, truth and lies, justice and exploitation, it doesn't matter how powerful it looks on the outside, it is already in decline. Because no empire can outbuild, no military can outfight, no economy can outgrow a people who have lost their moral foundation or maybe never had one. That's the real warning history gives us. Not that collapse might come, but that it starts the same way from within. This is Dove and I. WHGE 95.3 FM. Let me tell you something. I ain't forgot. You think I have? Oh no. I ain't forgot about you nasty ass pedophiles that allegedly murdered an infant, you orange disaster. You poopy pants bastard. I ain't forgot they threw an infant in the Michigan lake. I ain't forgot. We know why it's a war in Iran. Stop calling it the Iranian war and call it the Epstein cover-up war. Nasty bastards. And let me take a little musical break. WHGE 95.3 FM. Fuck y'all. Yeah, I said that off mic. All right. WHGE 95.3 FM. And it don't stop. What am I talking about? Ex-cop arrested for allegedly planning mass shooting targeting black people. Christopher Gillum. His family reported him to authorities after he expressed desire to go to a festival in New Orleans so he could kill black people. Patterns. Let's go to Houston, where the racist cop relieved duties at the self-recording N-word race rant about her hatred for black people. What the hell we do to you? Houston police officer Ashley Gonzalez recorded herself repeatedly using the N-word and ranting about her hatred for black people. Now, the Blue Lives Matter crew loves to talk about how not all cops are racist, but between Gilliam allegedly planning a mass shooting with the express purpose of killing people, and a Houston cop going on a racist rant about how she hates black people, this week has further revealed that law enforcement sure seems to attract racists. This is not a coincidence, it's a pattern. And pretending otherwise is part of the problem. You got Christopher Gillum, a former cop allegedly plotting a mass shooting specifically targeting black people at a public festival. Not random violence, not generalized rage, targeted, intentional, racial. And the only reason it didn't happen, because his own family stepped in before the system did. Excuse me. Then in the same breath, You got a Houston officer, Ashley Gonzalez, comfortable enough in her own skin, in her own badge, to sit there and record herself spewing hatred over and over again, using the ugliest language in the American vocabulary like it's second nature. And stop and think about that. One allegedly planning violence, another openly expressing hatred, both wearing or having worn the uniform of law enforcement. And we're still being told, not all cops. That phrase, not all cops, has become a shield, not a truth. Because the real question isn't whether every single officer is racist. The real question is, why does this profession keep attracting and protecting people who are? Law enforcement is supposed to represent authority, protection, and public trust. But what happens when the people entrusted with that power harbor hatred for the very communities they police? That's not just hypocrisy. That's danger with a badge. Because racism in law enforcement doesn't just stay in someone's private thoughts or off-duty rants. It shows up in who gets stopped, who gets searched, who gets arrested, who gets brutalized, and who doesn't make it home. Bias plus authority equals consequence. And here's the uncomfortable truth. These incidents aren't shocking because they're rare. They're shocking because they keep getting exposed. For every officer caught on tape, how many aren't? For every plot stopped, how many warning signs get ignored? This isn't about demonizing every individual officer. It's about recognizing a systemic vulnerability, one that allows people with explicit racial hatred to enter, remain in, and operate within institutions that carry lethal authority. And until that vulnerability is addressed honestly, not politically, not defensively, but honestly, these headlines will not stop. They'll just rotate names. Different cities, same story. And the community that keeps ending up in the crosshairs already knows the truth. When hatred finds its way into power, it doesn't stay theoretical. It becomes policy, practice, and sometimes planned violence. Yeah. This is the Open Eye. And I'm your host, the Third Eye Optometrist. We're looking at the world through a lens that doesn't blink, especially when the view gets uncomfortable. WHGE 95.3 FM. The Open Eye. We just broke down the headlines regarding Christopher Gillum and Ashley Gonzalez, law enforcement figures caught in the act of harboring or planning lethal anti-black violence. But if we want to be truly honest about the landscape of 2026, we have to look beyond the badge and into the neighborhoods. The friction within the POC umbrella. There's a hard truth we often glaze over in the name of solidarity. And that is the pervasive anti-black racism within the Latino community. When we see an officer like Ashley Gonzalez, a Latina, filming herself in an N-word laced tirade, it's a jarring reminder that shared minority status does not equate to shared struggle. For many in the black community, this reinforces the heavy words of the late, great Dr. John Henrik Clarke, who famously stated, African Americans have no friends. The only people who will truly fight for black people are black people. The term people of color was designed to build a coalition. But as Dr. Clarke suggested, it often functions to dilute the specific urgency of the black experience. The hierarchy of proximity. In many Latino cultures, mejorar la raza. Mejorar la raza. That means improving the race. And that's deeply embedded. It's a concept that prizes whiteness and devalues African roots. The erasure of Afro-Latinos and their blackness isn't just external. It happens within the Latino community against those who are visibly of African descent. Using the POC label can sometimes allow non-black groups to benefit from the progress made by black civil rights movements while still harboring the same prejudices as the dominant power structure. When we stop including black people in the people of color category, and some activists now advocate, we aren't being divisive. We're being accurate. We are acknowledging that the black experience in America carries a unique weight of systemic targeting that isn't always shared by others under that broad umbrella. When a Houston cop looks like the community she's supposed to represent, but speaks with the tongue of the oppressor, she proves Dr. Clarke's point. Solidarity is a two-way street. And right now, it looks like a lot of folks are parked on the wrong side of the road. Does the people of color label do more to help black political power? Or does it ultimately mask the specific anti-blackness we see coming from other marginalized groups? It ultimately masks the specific anti-blackness. It's linguistic camouflage. When we use broad terms like people of color or minority, we create a safety in numbers illusion that often lets everyone else off the hook. It allows people to claim the benefits of diversity while quietly maintaining a hierarchy that keeps black people at the bottom. This is Open Eye. We're peeling back the layers on why that mask is so dangerous. WHGE 95.3 FM. The erasure of specificity. I had a hard time getting that out. That's right. Here's the point. When you mask anti-blackness under the POC umbrella, you're essentially saying all struggles are equal. But open-eyed listeners, your third eye optometrists see the blur. Selective solidarity. Other groups are often happy to march alongside black people when it benefits the collective. But when the headlines fade, the anti-black sentiment remains in their homes, the dinner table conversations, and as we saw in Houston, behind the badge. All right. Tell you about the buffer class. Historically, certain groups have been used as a buffer to protect the status quo. By identifying as POC rather than acknowledging their own anti-black biases, they can distance themselves from the oppressor label while still practicing the same discrimination. Acknowledging the no friends reality. When we take Dr. Clark's stance that black people stand alone, it isn't an act of aggression, it's an act of self-preservation. By removing black people from the people of color category, we force the world to look at anti-blackness as specific, unique. It prevents a Latina cop like Ashley Gonzalez from hiding behind her own heritage to excuse her vitriol. You cannot be marginalized and an oppressor at the same goddamn time without being called out for the hypocrisy. If the POC umbrella is large enough to cover both the victim and the person planning their execution, then the umbrella is broken. This is the open eye, and we closing the book on illusions today. Let's be crystal clear. This isn't about unity slogans. We heard enough. We're all in this together. We heard enough of that to last a lifetime while the bodies of our people are still being targeted by those who claim to share our struggle. This isn't about feel-good coalitions. We done being the foot soldiers for movements that won't even check their own households for the same anti-black venom we fighting in the street. When a Latino officer can film a manifesto of hate against black people, it proves that people of color is often just a mask for the same old prejudice. This is about the reality of the uniqueness of the black struggle. Our history, our trauma, and our survival do not fit into a neat little box with everybody else. We are following the vision of Dr. John Henry Clark and opening our eyes to the fact that the only hand coming to save us is the one at the end of our arm. The third eye optometrist is telling you, stop looking for friends and start looking for results. If the coalition doesn't address the specific war on black lives, then it's just another wall used to hide the enemy. Keep your eyes open and your guard up. This is WHGE 95.3 FM. Stay focused. WHGE 95.3 FM. I'm Patrice Gibbs. This is The Open Eye. What is D-theft? What is D-theft? D-theft, also called title theft or home title fraud, is a form of real estate fraud where someone illegally transfers ownership of a property without the owner's knowledge or consent. Once the title is stolen, the fraudster can sell the property, take out loans against it, rent it out and collect income, attempt eviction of the rightful owner. At its core, it's identity theft plus property theft, often executed through forged documents and gaps in oversight. And how this typically works: targeting the property. Homes with no mortgage, free and clear. Elderly owners. Heirs property or absentee owners. Property in rapidly appreciating neighborhoods. Forging documents. Fake deeds are created with forged signatures or stolen identities. Notarization is sometimes falsified or improperly verified. Recording the deed. The fraudulent deed is filed with a county recorder or a clerk, because recording officers generally don't verify ownership. The document can be accepted as valid. Monetizing the theft. Property is sold quickly to a third party. Loans are taken out using the property as collateral. Rent is collected while the real owner is unaware. And who is most at risk? Deed theft is not random. It's targeted. Black homeowners in communities of color, elderly individuals, families with the heirs property, informal inheritance without clear title, or owners who live out of state, homes without active mortgages. Deed theft intersects with a long history of housing discrimination and wealth extraction. And that's why black communities are disproportionately affected, as they have lower access to legal services and estate planning. Higher prevalence of heirs property due to historical barriers to formal ownership. Targeting of neighborhoods undergoing gentrification. Generational wealth concentrated in home equity, making property a prime target. This makes deed theft not just a crime, but a systemic vulnerability. Deed theft is quiet, fast, and devastating. It exploits legal gaps, targets the vulnerable, and strips families of one of the most important assets they have, their home. Understanding how it works is the first line of defense. Preventing it and holding perpetrators accountable is what determines whether communities can actually build and keep generational wealth. Let's talk about what it really means when a government has to create a whole office, an entire department, just to stop people from stealing black people's homes. Let that sit for a second. Not regulating the market, not expanding access, not closing a wealth gap. No, stopping theft. Because that's what deed theft is. It's not a paperwork error. It's not a misunderstanding. It's not a loophole. It's organized, targeted, predatory theft aimed straight at black communities. I heard that Sister Sherry said she could be wrong, but she thinks the best way to protect oneself from deed theft is to put the deed under an LLC. I don't think you're off base there at all, sister. So when Zoran Mondani launches a deed theft prevention office days after Chi Osei, councilman, makes headlines because he was arrested trying to protect one of his constituents, understand what's being acknowledged without being said out loud. The problem is so widespread, so normalized, it's devastating. It's so widespread that it requires a government intervention just to stop people from getting robbed in broad daylight. And here's the part nobody should pretend is new. Land theft from black communities didn't start with forged signatures and shady title transfers in 2026. There's a long, unbroken pattern. It's heirs' property stolen because families didn't have access to legal protection. It's elders tricked into signing documents they didn't fully understand. It's homes taken through tax manipulation, predatory liens, and quiet legal maneuvers. It's entire neighborhoods flipped not by development, but by dispossession. Different century, same blueprint. Because generational wealth in black communities has always been treated like something negotiable, something up for grabs. And let's be clear, you don't create an office like this unless the damage is already deep. You don't assign attorneys to assist homeowners unless homeowners are already under siege. You don't launch outreach to black communities unless those communities have already been targeted repeatedly. This isn't just policy. This is an admission that the system has allowed this to happen, and the admission that protection came only after the harm, and a admission that for too long the burden was on the victims to figure it out alone. Now the question that becomes, is this office going to be a shield or just a bandage? Because if you're serious about protecting generational wealth, you don't just respond to theft. You dismantle the conditions that make the theft possible in the first goddamn place. You educate before the scam, you enforce before the loss, and you prosecute like it matters, because it does. This isn't just about houses. This is about legacy. This is about stability. This is about whether black ownership in America is protected or perpetually under attack. And the fact that we even need to ask that question speaks volumes. This is Dope and I. WHGE 95.3 FM, the open eye. All right. Let's talk about something that's going on here. Because what you're looking at isn't some neutral legal development. What you're looking at, all right, if it's a long, familiar pattern, discredit the institution that threatens power, then try to dismantle it. Tell you about power, history, and pattern. The Southern Poverty Law Center has spent decades doing something most institutions won't touch: turning hate into a legal liability. They didn't just name the Ku Klux Klan, they broke them financially. The most famous example is the 1980 civil case following the lynching of Michael Donald. With the courage of his mother, Beulah Mae Donald, and legal backing from the SPLC, the United Klans of America was sued into bankruptcy. There was a symbolism. That was infrastructure destruction. Since then, the Southern Poverty Law Center has tracked and exposed extremist networks, won major civil rights judgments against hate groups. They're one of the most widely used hate monitoring databases in the country. And they brought civil rights education in the classrooms nationwide. And that work has made them a target. For decades, conservative political actors and aligned media have attacked the SPLC, not just because it's ineffective. Not because it's ineffective. Because it's effective in ways that cost real money and power. So when accusations surface, especially ones that contradict everything the organization has historically done, you don't just ask, is this true? You ask, who needs this to be believed? Let's deal with reality. The Southern Poverty Law Center didn't become controversial by accident. They became controversial because they made white supremacy expensive. They didn't argue with the Ku Klux Klan. They took their assets. They didn't debate hate groups. They bankrupted them. And that changes the game. And when you change the game pushes back. Now suddenly out of nowhere, you're supposed to believe that the same institution that financially crippled the United Klans of America is secretly funding people connected to it. That's not just suspicious, that's convenient. Because if you can discredit the watchdog, you don't have to answer for what is exposed. And let's go deeper, because this isn't new. When black organizations organized power, the government didn't hesitate. The Black Panther Party was infiltrated, surveilled, disrupted under COINTELPRO. Leaders were targeted, movements were fractured, entire communities were destabilized. That was full force. But groups like the Ku Klux Klan, they've been historically treated less like an existential threat and more like a recurrent problem. Managed, monitored, but rarely dismantled with the same intensity. That contrast tells you everything. So what is this really about? Huh? Let me tell you, it's about neutralizing impact. The SPLC's real power isn't just lawsuits, it's credibility. It's documentation. It's the ability to say, this is hate and here's the evidence. If you can stain that credibility, even with weak or false allegations, you don't have to win in court. You just have to create doubt. And in this era, doubt's enough. Mm-hmm. Let me tell you something. The work of the Southern Poverty Law Center speaks for itself. From the courtroom victories to the dismantling of violent networks, to standing with people like Beulah Mae Donald when the system failed her son. That legacy doesn't get erased by accusations. So the real question isn't whether people can make claims. The real question is, are we going to let those claims override decades of documented truth? Because if you take down the institutions that fight hate, don't be surprised when hate starts feeling the pressure. WHGE 95.3 FM. This is the Open Eye. WHGE 95.3 FM. Today, 90 years ago, April 25th, 1936, James Garfield Gibbs turned 9 years old. He celebrated his birthday with the birth of his little brother, John. Happy birthday, Uncle Garfield. Happy birthday, Pop. Pop. John Gibbs. The day he would have been 90. And I've been thinking, some men leave behind money. Some men leave behind property. Some leave behind silence. Pop left behind laughter that still protects me. The man who taught me that laughter isn't just sound, it's shelter. Pop was the kind of father who could catch you red-handed and still be doubled over laughing. Even when I put super glue on the toilet seat. When I slip salt into the sugar bowl. When I pour lighter fluid down the ant hole in the backyard. He said, damn, the boy gonna blow up the whole neighborhood. Even when I froze water balloons, just to see how hard they hit. Even when I stole eggs to throw at cars. Even when I taught my little brother the final points of profanity. Even when I shined his Sunday shoes with Crisco. Any one of those should have earned me a whipping. But Pop couldn't punish me because Pop couldn't stop laughing. And that laughter wasn't weakness. That laughter was discipline without damage. That laughter was correction without cruelty. That laughter said, I see you. And you still belong. That laughter is the reason I didn't grow up broken. That laughter is the reason I'm still standing. I miss that laughter, Pop. But Pop was more than a laugh. He was a quick wit, a natural storyteller, and a gifted poet. If his ambition had tilted that way, he would have been a top comedian. Not the kind chasing applause. The kind who controlled the room without ever asking for it. Ask anybody. Pop used to tell me, boy, you're a natural smartass. Then he'd pause, let it land, wink at me. He got it from me. And that wasn't just a joke. That was inheritance. Because what Pop really gave me wasn't just humor. He gave me timing. He gave me perspective. He gave me an ability to look at chaos and refuse to let it define me. He gave me the instinct to turn pressure into presence. One day stays with me. It was in the mid-70s. The Puerto Rican community on the west side of Wilmington rises up at the police kill a beloved priest. And of course, black kids joined in. Bricks and bottles flying at the cops. Sirens, horses, running feet. I make it to Pop's house breathless. And there he is on the front porch, turning wood and concrete into sanctuary. A dozen of us, hearts pounding, and Pop, calm. A cop on horseback rise up. All these your kids? Pop looks at the porch, full of scared brown faces, and without hesitation says, yeah, they're my kids. Now understand what that means. That wasn't biology, that was responsibility. That was a man saying, if danger comes, it comes through me first. And then Pop pauses, looks again, smiles that Pop smile, and says, and there's 2 missing. That's not just funny, that's genius under pressure. That's a man who knew how to disarm tension without surrendering dignity. That's a man who could turn a porch into a safe house and a confrontation into a punchline without ever backing down. That's Pop. Quick, funny, fearless. But more than that, foundational. Because everything I am on this microphone, every pause, every punchline, every moment where I refuse to fold, that's him. That's his voice echoing through mine. He taught me humor is more than a joke. It's survival. It's resistance. It's intelligence in motion. It's how you stay human in a world that keeps trying to harden you. Pop didn't just raise a son. He built a man who could take pain and still find breath between the blows. Pop. John Charles Gibbs. 90 years in spirit. Laughter as a shelter. Wisdom as inheritance. I miss you, but I carry you every time I open my mouth and make the world listen. Happy birthday, Daddy. WHGE 95.3 FM. All right. All right, we cover a lot today. Not just stories, not just headlines. Oops. WHGE 95.3 FM. All right, let me say that again. We covered a lot today. Didn't have a mic on. Not just stories, not just headlines, but patterns. And the one thing I want you to carry with you after this broadcast is this. None of what we talked about today exists in isolation. Not the narratives, not the policies, not the outcomes. They're all connected by design, not coincidence. Because systems don't just operate, they protect themselves. And the way they protect themselves isn't always with force. Sometimes it's with confusion. Sometimes it's with distraction. Sometimes it's with just enough truth to hide a much bigger lie. So the question isn't just what happened. The real question is who benefits from how it's being explained. Because if you can control the explanation, you can control the reaction. And if you can control the reaction, you never have to change the system. That's why seeing clearly matters. That's why understanding patterns matters. That's why conversations like this matter. Because once you stop reacting and start recognizing, you move different. You question more. You accept less. And most importantly, you stop being easy to manage. So as you move through the rest of your day, don't just hear what's said. Analyze what's meant. Don't just watch what happens. Study what repeats. And don't just live in this system. Learn how it moves. Because awareness isn't just knowledge. It's protection. I hope you learned something today, because I learned something before I got here. Okay? Just open eyes. Stay sharp. Stay focused. And as we always tell you, Destiny determines who enters your life, but you decide who stays. Therefore, value those who value you, and don't treat those as a priority who treat you as an option. I'm Patrice Gibbs. This is Open Eye on WHGE 95.3 FM. Thanks for joining me. Peace. All right. As I always close with, global African supremacy. Watch Burkina Faso. In spite of the damages that's going on around the continent, the world was a much better place when the African ruled. I'm Patrice Gibbs. Peace.